Hey folks, your favorite peasant is back with more updates on my game set in ancient Rome. Thanks so much for watching. So we got some good updates coming your way. I added cooking. The player now has the ability to place a campfire and open the campfire menu up and drag and drop cookables like fish and flour into the cooking slots, and then they can fire them up and they turn into a sort of processed or cooked variant of what you put in. So now you can make cooked fish and wheat porridge from the flour. And I hope to add more items like that as time goes on. And the idea is that cooked food will give you bonuses to your XP gain and things like that. So that was, that's the cooking stuff. And there's a fuel menu down below, and this fuel menu will be fleshed out later, and you'll be able to either add wood or charcoal, stuff like that, to the fire to burn stuff, and light button and all that. So that's the new cooking functionality. The player can now process raw food ingredients that they procure from the world, which is really cool. And the other thing I did was I discovered that the tree instances in Unity, you can't really interact with them, or you can't at least raycast with them. So what I realized I had to do is I had to swap all of the trees out with a game object type of tree instead of a tree instance, which is sort of nuanced and weird. So the way that Unity can have a bunch of trees on the screen at once without tanking the performance is by using tree instances. But a tree instance can't be interacted with. So my map is sort of like a tile system, and so I'm basically swapping out all the tiles that the player's on, all the trees on the tile that the player's on, with game object trees. And then I can chop them down. And so after doing that, now I have felling in the game, and you can run up to a tree. And I added the primitive axe. I can't remember if that was in before or not. But now you can chop down a tree, and I split them up into two different models in Blender. That's how I did that. And I just swap out between the singular model and the two models, and then the top one I give physics to, and so it just falls over. We did masonry, so I added stones to the map. I had stones before, but they were really simple and bad looking, so I brought in like better looking stones that use more polygons, and it's more appropriate for the map. And I brought in the wedge and the mallet. So now the player can pull out the wedge and the mallet and harvest stone. So they can now harvest wood and stone. I don't know if I mentioned that they could harvest wood with the lumberjack stuff. So that's stone, and if you hit enough stone, eventually the stone goes away. And in the future, I'd like to break it down into sort of, the stone sort of gets broken down into chunks of itself, or like a quarried version of itself, sort of. That's the vision. And the other thing we did was we integrated the Digger Pro tool. I did integrate it, and I did get terraforming to work, and I did get caves to work, which is something that I'm kind of obsessed with, is caves. So I really wanted caves, but unfortunately there was kind of a mishap, which I'll talk about later. And I also added iron ore to the walls of the caves for the player to, like the masonry mallet and wedge, iron ore out of the cave walls is the idea. And so the idea is that like ores can be found in caves, and you can dig into the ground to get ore, basically, sort of like Minecraft and Eco and a lot of other games like that. I wanted some really simplified version of that. So the next thing I added was smithing, and it's a very similar menu to the cooking menu. And the idea is very similar. You drag the iron ore into the smelting slot, and if you put fuel into the fire and you light it, it processes the iron ore. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward and simple, sort of like the cooking, and that's how you process iron ore into iron ingot. And that will be used later for crafting for swords and armor and tools and things like that. And I hope to add copper and bronze and tin and steel and gold and silver. So that's sort of the future of metallurgy in the game. And there's going to be like actual models and stuff of the ingots and stuff like that. And it'll make more sense as time goes on. And then the other thing I did was I tiled the nav mesh, which was difficult. I finally figured out how to do it. But it leads back into my issue of sort of the nav mesh all blew up on me as I discovered that you can't serialize the default Unity nav mesh, and I didn't know that. So that's the new revelation, not revolution, that I had about game dev with Unity. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in the future, but I did manage to tile the nav mesh, which was an awesome thing. I'm not sure, what the future of the nav mesh really holds for the default Unity nav mesh, so I don't really know what to tell you. It might work later in the future. Other things I did was I fleshed out the NPC stats. So now there's a new tablet, the people tablet, and if you E over a person, the people tablet pops up, and you can see their info, like their name and their social status, how much wealth they have, and it won't show all this to you right away. You kind of have to earn this knowledge. So the more you interact with them, every once in a while they'll tell you a little anecdote about themselves, and then it'll be like, bing, this person's a patrician or something. Or maybe, maybe not the patrician, because maybe that'll be obvious from the clothes and stuff, but maybe like how much wealth they have or what properties they own or something like that. And you can see there's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 of these things. So pretty cool stuff, and that should flux over time as the circumstances of each NPC changes. So for now, they're just kind of randomly generated from like a pool of names and a pool of just a pool of strings, basically, for most of them. So yeah, that's the people tablet, and I added personality sliders, which is a concept that shouldn't be so foreign to the gamer. It's kind of like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and the ability to go evil or good. But I'm kind of fleshing that out a little bit and saying there are other sliders besides evil and good, sort of D&D nerdish, chaotic and lawful, these types of things. And these sliders will sort of influence a NPC's decision-making process, and also the decisions that the NPC makes will influence the sliders. I know that's kind of weird. I said a lot of things there, but it's like, imagine like training a soldier. Like maybe he's cowardly at first, but the more you put him in positions that boost his self-confidence, the more he becomes brave. You can condition an NPC to improve these sliders. That's the idea. I'm not sure how deep it's going to be. It might just be sort of simple. And then at the bottom, traits, and I haven't really fleshed that out at all, but that's kind of like RimWorld-esque, like they have bloodlust, they're greedy, things like that. And that's really I haven't even really touched that at all. So I just wrote, so far there's just like a couple of them. Bloody. But yeah, so that NPC would get a boost if they did something bloody, for example. Or if they're kind, they'll spread kindness. So the next thing I did was the NPC jobs, which was going to be a whole spiel, and I was going to do NPC daily schedules part 2 jobs, and it was this whole thing, but it involved the nav mesh so heavily that I don't really want to show any of it. So that ended up being sort of a month of work that I can't even really show. But I had a lot of good stuff going on, you guys. It's kind of sad. To watch the NPCs who were fishers go to the water and like fish was really cool. And essentially the city, or the small village, is really being brought to life now as these 20, 30 NPCs that I'm testing with are walking around to where they should go, and the lumberjack walks up to the tree, and the mason walks up to the stone. And it was cool to see all the NPCs go their own different ways, but sorry, I just can't really show it to you right now because I've deactivated all the nav mesh stuff. But the other thing we did was the map generation screen. And it's just like an early prototype, but player can basically now dice roll through the different maps, and it just generates a random seed for the map, and it sort of simulates a random map generation. And I just have a dice button so far, but I'd love to have like a water level and all the classic things you can think of in a game, like, you know, how densely forested is it, or how much stone does it have, or like to mess with the slope or the height of things, and how like it reminds me more of like Tropico, and how you could specify what you wanted your sort of procedural island to generate like. So there's a lot of Tropico in what I'd like this screen customization to be like. But in the end, I'm not sure what I'll end up moving forward with. It might be something much more simple. But I did add a second map, which is just sort of a reskin of my first one. And I'm calling this the North Africa map for now. Just sort of like a sort of a deserty, coastal desert type deal. Sort of like Carthage, or Tunisia, or some modern, what's that country? Morocco. There's a lot of countries like that on the northern coast of Africa. So that's the new map generation screen, and I also added the character customization screen, which is just pretty much the default out-of-the-box advanced people pack character generation demo scene, which specifically tells you not to include in your in your project. So I've gone ahead and done that, but I hope to make it more customized and have like a Roman setting in it, and I hope to make the buttons different. We'll see how far I get, but for now the early prototype's in, and it does persist to the next screen, and which brings me to my next thing that I did, which was serialization, which initially was pretty successful and straightforward, and I just kept breaking things down into primitive data types and saving it, and making sure that I could load it, and I was able to get really everything to load and save, except for the nav mesh. And unfortunately, the nav mesh turned into this whole fiasco. So the long and short of the nav mesh fiasco was that I discovered that I couldn't serialize the nav mesh, and what that ultimately means is that if you're generating a nav mesh at runtime, you're not able to save that data and load it, so you have to generate it every time. And that's basically nerd talk for that. You're going to have longer loading screens, and almost unacceptably long loading screens. So I realized I did have to serialize the nav mesh, and I wasn't going to be able to do that with the Unity default nav mesh tools. I was going to have to get a special tool set. So yeah, the nav mesh fiasco. So my solution basically for now is just to shutter all the nav mesh stuff, which involves shuttering all the NPC stuff, unfortunately, until I can get a different nav mesh system in place that can serialize, which I believe does exist. I think it's this asset, but I'm not really sure, and I'll let you know when I know what the solution to this problem is. I believe you can serialize a nav mesh. I even tried to do it myself. It took me like a week to do. It was crazy to get to a dead end in a game dev process after so much effort. Is so sad. So NPCs are on hold, but I got everything else loading and saving, which was really big deal. And then I got to rivers, and I really wanted to have rivers in my game, but I had given up. But I kept seeing this river tool pop up on the asset store, and I really wanted to give it a try. And I tried it before. I tried river tools before, not this particular one. And I'd failed. And it was just like before, where it was like I failed. I succeeded all the way up until the build, you know? It even worked in the editor, and then it just didn't work in the build. And I was just like, ah. And you know, it's just one of those moments. And so I tried again. I was like, I'll try again. And I bought the river pack. The RAM tool. And I bought the new one. And so I didn't even look and didn't even realize I had to upgrade my Unity project for it to work. It's just sometimes you gotta rebuild your Unity project. I guess that's the moral of that story. And so I did. And I have like new lines under my eyes, and I did it. I just recently succeeded. I rebuilt the game in the newer version of Unity, and now I have rivers, and that's what I got for doing it. Is the updated rivers. I downloaded a lot of updated versions of the tools I was using, and I brought in rivers procedurally, which is a huge deal for me. And so I have rivers now procedurally generating at runtime on a procedurally generating map. And I am so super stoked about that. So that means that every single playthrough, the map will be different to the player, and it'll have rivers on it. You don't see that actually that often in games. And you'll notice, because I've been noticing, I've been zooming into rivers in games, and I'm like, how much did they really do? I've been noticing the water oftentimes doesn't flow in the right direction, and so now I'm giving myself a little bit more slack for kind of holding out to these standards of having the river be at least kind of a functional entity that looks like it's flowing in a correct direction. So I'm so stoked that rivers are in. It's a huge deal. It's going to allow me to add water into the game, which I really wanted, and I was doing away with, and I was sad about. So the RAM tool, I can officially tell you, does allow you to generate multiple rivers at build time procedurally. One step back, two steps forward. That's really the lesson of this. Sometimes you just get so frustrated and upset when you really care about something, and you have to go backwards, and it's just like you're pulling your hair out. And you got to remember, sometimes it's two steps back, or whatever I said, one step back, two steps forward, and that the lessons you learn along the way really are the gold. You have to realize that you're gonna have setbacks, and not give up anyways. Don't give up when you have setbacks. Fine, move on, next thing. If something is hard, it is a filter. It funnels out the people without perseverance. The first bison to get to the top of the mesa finds a field full of grass, untouched. If something is hard for you, it is hard for others. If you can break through it, you are on your way to achieving your difficult, noteworthy goal. In the end, I'm really just a gaming nerd, and I'm trying to make the game that I've always wanted to play. So when you get frustrated by obstacles, just remember that this is just another barrier that others will have to overcome to achieve your goal. So never give up, you guys. Thank you so much to all the new subscribers. This has been a Woodsman the Peasant production, and don't forget to walk softly and carry a big dream. Peace.